The late spring wind carried the scent of freshly mown grass as Mike Carter's sedan coasted down Maplewood Lane. He'd spent the entire week holed up in his downtown design loft, his eyes bloodshot from staring at mood boards and paint swatches. On an impulse, he'd scrolled through local classifieds and found an estate sale promising rare antiques and curiosities. He needed a break from sterile modernism and perhaps a single, remarkable piece to anchor his next living room concept. He parked under a yellowing street lamp and stepped onto the cracked sidewalk. Folding tables lined the driveway of a sagging bungalow, chipped ceramic figurines, stacks of dog-eared novels, tarnished silverware in faded velvet cases. Nothing sparked his interest until he spotted it in the far corner. Leaning against a folding chair stood a full-length mirror whose presence seemed to absorb the gathering dusk. The frame was solid copper, its surface mottled green with age but still gleaming where the metal had been polished by countless hands. Intricate vines curled along the border, delicate roses carved with heartbreaking detail. At the top, two hollow faces, one male, one female, stared out with haunting sorrow. The mirror's glass was slightly convex and bore a smoky haze, as if it had absorbed decades of whispered confidences. Mike felt his pulse quicken. He circled the mirror, fingertips tracing the vines. The metal was cool, almost damp to the touch. Nestled among the foliage he noticed tiny symbols, runes or sigils etched so finely they almost vanished when he blinked. Every time his eyes shifted, they seemed to ripple, as though alive. A soft, uneven cough drew his gaze. An elderly woman sat behind the tables, framed by shadows. Her shawl, a tapestry of autumn hues, draped around her frail shoulders. She peered at him through silver-rimmed spectacles. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Mike asked. She nodded slowly. $50, she rasped, "but if you truly want it, remember one thing." She leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "Never place it directly opposite your bed." Mike frowned. "Why not?" The woman shut her eyes, swallowed. When she spoke again, her words felt like a gust of cold air. "Some reflections should never follow you home." Then she turned away, her knitting needles clicking in uncomfortable silence. He hesitated, hand on the mirror's frame. Logic warred with fascination. Antique lore often brimmed with superstition, cursed dolls, haunted paintings, yet he was an interior designer, not a ghost hunter. He counted out crisp bills, lifted the mirror into his trunk, and drove home under a silver sliver of moon, her warning echoing at the edge of his mind. Back in his townhouse, Mike wrestled the mirror out of the car. He'd chosen a blank stretch of wall opposite his sofa for the perfect statement piece. Inside, the house felt stiflingly ordinary: neutral walls, minimalist furniture, no quirks to draw the eye. This mirror would change everything. With 2 quick drills and sturdy screws in place, he hoisted the mirror onto the wall. The copper frame caught the overhead light, its patina glowing like embers in a dying fire. Mike stepped back, surveying his work. Already, the room felt transformed, imbued with a brooding elegance he'd never have achieved with paint and pillows alone. That night, Mike left the mirror where it was and climbed the stairs to his bedroom, exhaustion dragging at his limbs. He barely registered the echo of footsteps behind him, nor did he recall the sliver of movement flashed across the mirror's glass in the living room. He fell asleep before his head hit the pillow, dismissing the old woman's warning as nothing more than a quirky anecdote. When dawn broke, Mike shuffled downstairs with a cup of coffee in hand. As he passed the living room, he paused, feeling a sudden chill in his back. The mirror hung exactly as he'd left it, yet for an instant, he thought he saw a dark shape trailing behind him in its reflection. His heart thumped, he whirled around. The room stood empty, sunlit, and silent. He shook his head, blaming shadow and fatigue, and continued on his way. By midday, he'd convinced himself it had been his imagination. He sketched new layouts for clients, mentally layering in the mirror's ambience. But every time he glanced toward the living room wall, a small knot of dread twisted in his stomach. That evening, the air in his house seemed thicker. Mike lay in bed, mind buzzing with tomorrow's deadlines, when he heard a soft creak from below. He lay frozen, listening as another floorboard sighed. Adrenaline stirred him. He slipped from the covers, grabbed his rope, and crept down the hallway, heart pounding in his ears. The living room was dim, lit only by moonlight filtering through the curtains. As he stepped closer, the temperature dropped sharply, his breath formed a fleeting mist. He raised his phone's flashlight to the mirror. For a heartbeat, it was empty. Then behind him in the glass he saw a figure, tall, draped in shadows, hands resting on his shoulders. He spun around. Nothing. Turning back, he faced his own reflection. But the glass rippled, like water disturbed, and then stilled. Mike let out a strangled gasp and bolted upstairs, slamming his bedroom door. He pressed his back against the wood, hands shaking. Sleep was impossible. When he did finally drift off, the nightmares arrived. He found himself in a long, narrow hallway lined on both sides with mirrors, each reflecting a different version of himself, older, younger, smiling, screaming. At the corridor's end loomed the copper-framed mirror, its vines curling like living things. Drawn forward, he touched the glass and felt it pull at his chest, dragging him into the cold depths. He struggled to breathe, tried to cry out. Then he woke, drenched in sweat, the echo of that pull still thrumming in his veins. Mike sat upright, heart hammering, and stared at the dark ceiling until dawn's pale light seeped in. He vowed then to learn everything he could about the mirror's past. Hours later, he pored over antique forums and library archives. He discovered a faded newspaper article from July 1894, Eleanor Blackwood found dead before morning mirror. The account described a recluse who conducted seances in her parlor, desperate to contact her deceased daughter. One night, she collapsed before her hand mirror, eyes wide in terror, glass shattered at her feet. Locals rumored her grief had fused her spirit to the reflective surface, trapping her between worlds. Mike stared at the photo of the original frame, identical sorrowful faces, the same thorny vines, even the arcane glyphs. A shiver crawled up his spine. He realized the mirror he'd purchased must have been Eleanor's prized seance piece, imbued not only with her anguish but with whatever she summoned that final evening. By the time Mike climbed into bed that second night, the old woman's warning echoed louder than ever. He paced his room, mind racing, never opposite your bed. Moving the mirror had seemed petty before, now it felt like salvation. He resolved to adjust its position come daylight and to prepare himself for whatever came next. When Mike awoke the next morning, the memory of last night's specter still clawed at his mind. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, willing the dark figure to vanish from his thoughts. Yet the moment he opened his eyes, the hush of the room pressed in on him, heavier than any storm. He slid out of bed and crept to the window. Pale light filtered through the blinds, but the world outside seemed muted, distant, as if seen through frosted glass. He knew he could not ignore what was happening. After a hasty shower and a cup of coffee that trembled in his shaking hand, Mike returned to the living room. The mirror sat where he'd moved it, now tucked into a corner, its face angled toward the wall, almost as though he, too, wanted to turn his back on it. He flicked on the overhead lamp. The copper frame gleamed back at him, the sorrowful faces carved at its top frozen in perpetual lament. He swallowed and reached forward, hesitating only a moment before nudging it to face the wall fully. For a fleeting hour, he felt relief, as though distancing himself from the cursed glass had lifted a weight from his shoulders. He immersed himself in client sketches, trying desperately to reclaim the calm focus that once came so easily to him. But shadows of doubt never left the corner of his vision, flickers at the edge of his eye, half-heard whispers whenever silence reigned. That night, Mike resolved to stay awake until dawn if he had to. He set his laptop on the coffee table, tuned a late-night jazz playlist, and propped a floodlight beside the mirror, prepared to watch it until the sky lightened. He draped a thick sheet over the frame. Out of sight, out of mind, he hoped. As the hours crept by, he nibbled on crackers and sipped lukewarm tea, tapping at his screen in fits and starts. At precisely 1:47 a.m., the light flickered once, then died, plunging the room into darkness. Mike roared to his feet, heart pounding, and flung himself toward the lamp switch. Nothing happened. He lunged for his phone, but the screen went black as he turned it on. Cold washed over him, starting at his toes and racing upward. The sheet covering the mirror floated gently, as though a breeze whispered through the room, except the windows were shut. His breath formed icy clouds before him. He took a trembling step back. In the circle of light cast by the street lamp through the window, the sheet billowed upward, then settled. Seconds passed. Nothing moved. Mike exhaled in relief and fumbled for a spare candle he'd set on the mantel. As the flame caught, he aimed it at the draped mirror. The sheet lay motionless. He approached and yanked it away. The mirror stood empty, its glass reflecting only the candle's wavering glow. Yet as he looked, a chill ran down his spine. In the reflection behind him, a dark silhouette stood at the threshold of the hallway. Not a friendly neighbor or stray cat, an impossibly tall shape, its head tilting side to side as though studying him. He spun around. The hallway was empty. He looked back. The mirror's glass rippled, distorting the candle light, then stilled. Mike staggered backward, tripped over the coffee table, and crashed to the floor. He lay there, staring at the ceiling as adrenaline coursed through him. By sunrise, exhaustion overtook terror. Mike dragged himself upstairs, stripped off his clothes, and collapsed into bed. He slept until noon, but his rest brought no peace, only more vivid dreams. In those dreams, he wandered a vast hall lined with mirrors on every wall and ceiling. The reflections multiplied infinitely around him. Some mirrors showed him as he was: dark hair, stub-bled jaw, wide eyes, while others portrayed warped versions, skeletal visage, featureless face, laughter frozen on cracked lips. Each time he tried to look away, the reflections insisted he look closer. At the corridor's end, the copper-framed mirror waited. Its vines glowed faintly, and the carved faces blinked. A voice, faint, pleading, unmistakably human, echoed in his ears. "Help me." He reached out, fingertips brushing the glass. It rippled like water, and he felt his own body drawn forward, as if he were sinking into the depths. Panic surged, and he bolted awake, gasping, the sheets tangled about him like seaweed. He sat up, sweat-soaked and shaking. His bedroom walls felt too close, as though they might press in on him at any moment. After gathering himself, he crept downstairs and sat before the mirror's corner, where it faced the wall. For a long time he watched the blank copper frame, willing himself to believe it was inert. Over the next 2 days, Mike became obsessed. He scoured every resource, antique dealer bulletins, online occult forums, even contacting a historian who specialized in Victorian spiritualism. From faint clues he learned the mirror's true origin. It had once belonged to Eleanor Blackwood, a woman of considerable wealth and reclusive habits in the late 19th century. Following the tragic death of her young daughter Rose, Eleanor delved into seances, convinced she could bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Contemporary accounts spoke of her hosting nightly gatherings, placing polished mirrors around the room and chanting incantations to beckon the spirit world. On one fateful evening, she was found dead before her parlor mirror, her eyes fixed in horror and the glass shattered at her feet. More disturbing was a mention in an obscure diary entry: after Eleanor's death, those who acquired her mirror reported strange phenomena: cold spots, unexplainable whispers, reflections that moved independently of the world. One collector claimed to have seen a woman beckon him from inside the glass, another described his reflection smiling back at him even when he was frowning. Mike felt a cold knot form in his stomach. he realized the mirror's smoky haze was not mere age but a lingering residue of grief and ritual, an echo of Eleanor's final, desperate rites. Determined to rid himself of the mirror, Mike boxed it and drove to the municipal landfill under cover of dusk. He flung the crate onto the pile, watched it disappear into the heap of rotting mattresses and broken furniture. As he turned to leave, a dull clang rose from the trash. He spun back. Through the gaps in the refuse mulch he saw a flash of copper frame. The mirror lay upright, pristine, peeking out as though waiting for him. He fled without another glance. Back home, he wrestled it from the car and carried it to his fenced backyard. With a hammer borrowed from a neighbor's tool shed, he battered the frame, smashing the vines and prying the copper apart. The glass splintered into tiny shards. He scattered the fragments in the dirt and buried them beneath several inches of soil. Satisfied, he coaxed himself back inside. That night, a violent thunderstorm rolled in. Lightning arced across the sky, thunder rattled the roof. When he checked the backyard at dawn, the soil was undisturbed and the shards lay neatly arranged on the patio table, as though someone had reclaimed them. Mike stared in disbelief, rain-soaked and shaking. He realized brute force would not defeat the mirror's power. Left with no other choice, Mike turned to Lena Morales, a friend of a friend renowned for her expertise in haunting artifacts. She arrived the following evening bearing fragrant bundles of sage, bowls of blessed salt, and candles carved with protective runes. Mike led her to the living room where the mirror, though cracked, still gleamed ominously in its corner. Lena set the mirror upright on a small stand, carefully unmoved. She lit candles at its base and sprinkled salt in a circle around it. The room dimmed, the candle flames bent toward the glass like eager moths. Lena chanted in a low, melodic tone words drawn from ancient texts Mike could not recognize. A chill spread through the room, lifting the hairs on his arms. From the mirror's cracks, a fine mist oozed, coalescing into shapes, fleeting images of a little girl's laughter, a mother's sorrowful tears. Lena held out a chalice, and as the mist filled it, she sealed it with a ribbon of wax. Her final act was to wrap the mirror in a heavy cloth and bolt it shut in an old oak chest adorned with protective sigils. "It is sealed," she said, voice grave. "Do not open this box. If you hear it call again, do not answer." Mike nodded numbly, relief and dread warring in his chest. For the first time in days, his pulse slowed to something resembling normal. For 3 nights, all was quiet. Mike dared to believe the nightmare was over. He slept through the night, dreams free of glass corridors and pleading voices. On the 4th night, at exactly 2:02 a.m., he awoke to a soft whisper reverberating through the attic above his bedroom. His heart seized. "Mike," the voice was distant yet urgent. He lay perfectly still, straining to hear the next words, "Help me." He leapt out of bed, trembling, and crept to the attic door. It stood slightly ajar, though he was certain he had locked it. He flicked on the light. The oak chest sat in the center, its latch secure beneath the heavy cloth. The whisper came again, clearer, "Release me." Mike staggered backwards, body tense as a coiled spring. He slammed the attic door shut and leaned against it, gasping for air. Outside, the house lay silent, its calm facade betraying none of the terror within. In the darkness of his bedroom, Mike realized the truth: sealing the mirror had not ended its hold, it had merely silenced it for a time. Somewhere beyond that cloth and oak, Eleanor's spirit waited, calling him to set her free. And her voice would return, again and again, until he either obeyed or joined her beyond the looking glass. Mike Carter's heart pounded in the silent darkness as he backed away from the attic door, his breath shallow and rapid. Eleanor Blackwood's pleas, so soft yet urgent, had echoed through the rafters only moments ago. He steadied himself, pressing a hand to his chest, feeling the rapid thump of his pulse. The oak chest beneath heavy bolts and a thick cloth sat in the center of the attic floor, its protective sigils carved deep into the wood. He knew what he had to do. There would be no more running, No more temporary silences bought with solved circles or whispered incantations. If Eleanor's spirit was bound to that mirror, if her sorrow and rage had seeped into every crack of its frame, then only one path remained: complete release. By the faint glow of his phone flashlight, Mike descended the attic stairs and gathered what he'd need: Lena's remaining ritual supplies, a small jar of blessed salt, a length of iron chain, a hammer, and a folded slip of paper onto which he had painstakingly transcribed Eleanor's final diary entry. "Tonight I shall speak to you, my darling Rose. May the mirror open and close between worlds. If I do not return, know I sacrificed myself to bring you home." He placed the items on his living room table and cleared the immediate area of furniture. He lined up 7 tall candles in an arc, each base sprinkled with salt. In the center, he'd place the chest, and beside it, the jar of salt and the chain. Every client meeting plan, every modern design concept, every goal he'd held seemed to vanish in that moment, replaced by a singular purpose: end this and free them both. At midnight, Mike struck a match. The flames flickered to life, each candle casting long shadows that danced against the walls. He positioned himself behind the chest, facing it, and pulled the chest slit open. The cloth was now faded and dust-dulled, but beneath it, the mirror remained intact, its copper vines and sorrowful faces visible in stark relief. He poured salt in a wide circle around the mirror's base. Then, with trembling hands, he wound the iron chain 3 times around the frame, each link dragging across the jagged crack that ran through the glass. The metal hissed softly, as though reluctantly biting into the mirror's surface. Holding Eleanor's last words in his mind, he spoke aloud. "By blood and salt, by iron's clasp, I call the spirit bound within this glass. Release your sorrow, cross the divide. Return to peace on the other side." His voice echoed in the quiet room, melding with the flickering candlelight. At first, nothing happened. Then, a low hum rose from the glass, a vibration that tingled through Mike's bones. The air grew thick, as if weighted by centuries of grief. The mirror's smoky haze deepened to ink black at its center, and from its depths drifted the shape of a woman. Eleanor's figure emerged, her gown trailing as though carried by an unseen current. Her eyes, once hollow, now brimmed with tears that glinted in the candlelight. Mike swallowed, tears pricking his own eyes. The air pulsed with her sorrow, a pain so ancient and vast it made his chest ache. She raised a paler hand and pressed it against the glass, against the chain. The metal links hissed and glowed red-hot where her spirit touched them. "Please," her voice quivered, soft as a breeze through dried leaves. "Help me, free my Rose." Mike understood then that Eleanor's ritual, her sacrifice, had bound not only herself but also her daughter's spirit trapped within the mirror. To unbind one, he'd have to release both. He took a deep breath and lifted the hammer. The iron chain rattled as he positioned the hammer's head against a thick link. Eleanor's reflection watched him, her face a mix of hope and dread. "Forgive me," he whispered, and brought the hammer down with all his strength. The chain link cracked like a gunshot. The next instant, the entire chain vibrated, loosening its grip as if reactive, and the mirror's frame shuddered. Mike raised the hammer again and struck another link, then another, each blow sending tremors through the room. On the final strike, the chain fell slack, clattering to the floor. Eleanor's form wavered, her mouth opening in a silent cry. The mirror's crack widened, veins of fracture spider webbing across the glass. Light flared from within the mirror's depths, blinding and pure. The copper vines glowed white-hot, startling in their intensity, then melted back into darkness. In the instant before the mirror imploded, Mike saw her daughter, a small girl with pale curls and wide, mournful eyes, step out from the depths behind Eleanor. The two spirits reached toward each other, arms outstretched, reflections gleaming in a radiant halo. Then the glass collapsed inward with a final shatter that reverberated like a thunderclap. The mirror fragments scattered across the floor, each shard harmlessly crumbling to dust upon touch. Where the chest once held an antique mirror hung only emptiness. Silence reigned, thick and profound. Mike dropped to his knees, chest heaving. Candles guttered, their wax pooling in silent tears on the hardwood. He listened. No whispers. No creaks. No cold drafts, only the distant hum of the city, life moving on beyond his walls. Exhausted, he crawled to the front door and stepped outside. Dawn's pale light crept over the rooftops. The night's storm-laden skies had cleared, replaced by soft pink and gold. In the distance, birds woke and began their morning song. Mike closed his eyes and let the gentle chorus wash over him, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Over the next days, Mike cleared away the last of the shattered wood and copper. He burned the thick cloth and leanest chalice remains in a metal drum, stirring the flames until only embers remained. Where the mirror had hung, he placed a simple framed photograph of his late grandmother, whose gentle smile he found comforting rather than chilling. For a time, the house felt lighter, as though the removal of that ancient sorrow had let sunlight fill every corner. Mike slept through the night, untroubled by nightmares or phantom whispers. When he passed a reflective surface, he saw only himself and nothing more. A week after the ritual, Mike returned from running errands to find a plain envelope lying on his doorstep. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single slip of paper, written in an elegant, looping hand. "Thank you, Michael. We sleep in peace now. E&R." He recognized the initials, Eleanor and Rose. A quiet smile curved his lips. He folded the note gently and placed it in a small wooden box on his mantel alongside his grandmother's photo. Weeks turned into months. Mike threw himself into his design work with renewed vigor, the uncanny experience shaping his aesthetic in subtle ways. He favored light-filled spaces, soft curves, and mirroring surfaces that reflected warmth instead of gloom. Clients remarked on the comforting ambience of his projects, unaware of the ordeal that had taught him the true power of reflection. Occasionally, as he walked past the spot where the mirror had hung, he felt a faint ripple in the air, a gentle caress, almost like a breath. He smiled to himself, certain it was Eleanor and Rose's farewell gesture, a final gift of gratitude. And though he never forgot the terror he faced, Mike carried with him a deeper appreciation for the beholder's power, that some reflections may reveal darkness, but others, once set free, can guide us back into the light. The sun had barely climbed above the rooftops that Saturday morning when Claire Bennett turned onto Elm Grove Drive. She'd spent the previous afternoon scrolling through local sale listings, hunting for toys and keepsakes to delight her 7-year-old niece, Lily. When she saw the ad estate sale, dolls, toys, and vintage decor, her heart leapt. Memories of afternoons spent playing make-believe with her own childhood dollhouse flooded back, and she smiled at the thought of gifting Lily something magical. Claire navigated her compact sedan onto a quiet cul-de-sac lined with magnolia trees in bloom. At the end of the street stood a modest craftsman bungalow, its front yard dotted with folding tables draped in well-worn linens. Sunlight glinted off chipped teacups, faded board games, and a scattering of porcelain figurines. A plaid picnic blanket on the grass held a small collection of children's toys, wooden trains, a tin fire truck, and something else that made Claire stop in her tracks. There, resting on the blanket like a treasured relic, stood a dollhouse no larger than a shoebox but constructed with astonishing detail. The miniature facade was painted a cream white, trimmed in pastel teal, with tiny mullionied windows and a steeply pitched roof. Intricate brickwork was suggested by raised lines in the plaster walls. The front door featured a hinged knocker made of brass, and one window had lace curtains fashioned from a scrap of real lace. Even the shingles on the roof were formed of individual wood slices, each painted and aged to match the dollhouse's lived-in aesthetic. As Claire bent to examine it, the seller, a middle-aged man in a worn denim jacket, looked up. He scratched the back of his neck, eyes wary. "That one's special," he said quietly. "I don't usually part with it, but my sister loved it. If you really want it, he hesitated, then added in a lower tone, just know, one of the little rooms is locked tight. I never found the key. Claire smiled, dismissing the odd warning as a sentimental remark. She pictured Lily's delight in discovering secret rooms and hidden treasures. I'll take it, she said, handing over a $10 bill without bargaining. The seller nodded, lifted the dollhouse carefully, and passed it to her as though it were glass. Back in her car, Claire placed the dollhouse gently on the passenger seat, propping it against the window with a cushion. She turned on the radio and tapped her fingers on the steering wheel, already planning the surprise unveiling for Lily. It was going to be a wonderful weekend. That afternoon, Claire drove to Lily's house, a cozy bungalow 2 blocks away, and knocked on the front door. Lily's mother, Rachel, greeted her with a warm hug. Lily, shy and curious, peeked around her mother's legs, eyes widening at the sight of the dollhouse. "Oh, Aunt Claire, it's beautiful," Lily exclaimed, her voice a high, delighted squeak. She ran her fingers along the tiny railings of the front porch. Claire grinned. "Why don't we set it up in the living room, and you can decide which room to explore first?" They placed the dollhouse on a low coffee table beneath a bay window. Sunlight poured in, illuminating the tiny details, the painted roses climbing the facade, the stamped metal door knocker, the lead-edged windows. Claire and Rachel admired it for a moment, sharing the thrill of discovering something so well crafted. "Shall we look inside?" Claire asked, lifting the hinged roof section. The interior was divided into 3 levels and 4 rooms: a parlor, a kitchen, a bedroom, and a mysterious smaller chamber off to the side. Everything was scaled in perfect proportion, miniature paintings hung on the walls, a tiny porcelain tea set sat atop a lace-trimmed table, and a tiny brass candlestick rested on a mantel. Lily's brow furrowed as she peered into the smallest room. "Aunt Claire, this room has a little latch," she said softly, pointing to a tiny iron hook securing the door shut. Claire blinked. She hadn't noticed the metal clasp. "I wonder why it's locked," she murmured. She tried to lift the latch, but the hook resisted. It was solid cold iron, no flimsy wire that might yield with a gentle tug. "It looks like it's meant to stay locked," Claire said. "Maybe the previous owner left a surprise in there and meant for someone to find the key later." Lily nodded, bubbling with excitement at the mystery. "I can't wait to find the key." Rachel laughed. "Well, we'll keep our eyes open. In the meantime, why don't you explore the other rooms?" Lily moved first to the parlor, rearranging a miniature sofa and setting the teacup just so. Her small fingers were gentle yet purposeful. Claire watched her niece at play, heart-warmed by the scene. That evening, after Rachel tucked Lily into bed, Claire stayed behind to help with dinner dishes. As she stacked plates by the sink, she caught sight of the dollhouse in the living room. Lamplight bathed the tiny rooms in golden hues, and a faint breeze stirred the curtains. She felt an inexplicable chill, as though the dollhouse itself exhaled a breath of cold air. She shrugged and returned to the kitchen. Half an hour later, as she wiped down the counter, she heard it, a delicate creaking, like tiny hinges moving. She paused, heart fluttering. The sound came again, fainter still, a whisper of wood on wood. Claire placed her dish rag down and tiptoed to the living room doorway. The dollhouse sat silent. She leaned closer. The latch on the small room's door had shifted slightly, the iron hook was ajar by a fraction of an inch. Her skin prickled. She reached out, fingertips trembling, and gently lifted the hook. The tiny door swung open with a soft click. Inside, the single room was nearly bare, a painted floor, a small unlit hearth, and a scrap of folded paper lying in the corner. Claire picked up the micro-sized note. Unfolding it, she read the cramped script. "I am still playing." Her breath caught as the paper slipped from her fingers. It drifted onto the living room carpet. She looked from the note to the dollhouse, goosebumps rising along her arms. A sense of foreboding settled in her chest. That night, Claire struggled to sleep. Every creak of the house sounded amplified in the silence. She imagined shadows moving in the corners, figures flitting just out of sight. When at last she drifted into uneasy slumber, her dreams were filled with tiny footsteps echoing on wooden floors, invisible dolls scampering through endless corridors. At 3:16 a.m., she awoke with a start. The room was dark, but the faint glow of moonlight revealed rapid flickers of movement across the far wall. She sat up, heart racing. The soft patter of what sounded like little boots sounded in her ears. Claire slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway to the living room, flashlight in hand. The dollhouse sat on its table, silent once more. But when she shone the beam inside, she froze. The parlor's furniture was overturned, the miniature sofa lay on its side, and the tiny tea set was scattered as though an invisible guest had upended the table in haste. Her pulse quickened. She whispered, "Lily. Are you?" But only the empty room answered, lit by the moon's pale glow. She knelt before the dollhouse, hands shaking as she righted the sofa. Then, she noticed the small room's hatch, once opened, was now latched shut again, its iron hook secured as if freshly clicked into place. Claire forced herself to step back. She pressed a hand to her pounding heart and straightened. "It's just a dollhouse," she murmured. "A toy." But her voice lacked conviction. She returned to bed, doubts swirling like dust motes in moonlight. When she closed her eyes, she half expected to see those tiny footprints dancing across her sheets. Sleep came only in fits of feverish dreams. Morning light felt harsh in Claire's eyes. She sat on the edge of the bed, tugging at her sleeves. She recounted the night's events to Rachel over coffee, and to her surprise, Rachel did not dismiss her as over-imaginative. Instead, Rachel frowned. "Last night at exactly 3:16, I heard footsteps upstairs," Rachel confessed. "I thought it was Lily needing water. But when I went into her room, she was fast asleep." Claire's voice wavered. "I saw the parlor furniture overturned, and the small room was relatched." Rachel's brow furrowed. "That's impossible. I made sure everything was still when Lily went to bed." They exchanged uneasy looks. The dollhouse sat on the coffee table between them, its painted windows staring like watchful eyes. Claire couldn't shake the unease that settled over her home after that first night of movement. By sunrise, she had replayed every creak and whisper a dozen times, wondering if her mind had betrayed her. Yet when Rachel and Lily returned to the living room, the evidence lay undeniable upon the dollhouse's parlor floor. The miniature couch cushions were askew, and the tiny porcelain teacup sat shattered into 3 perfect pieces. "I swear I straightened everything before bed," Claire murmured, crouching to inspect the dollhouse more closely. She gently righted the teacup, following the jagged pattern of the shards. Lily patted over in her slippers, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama, the dolls were dancing," Lily said, voice small. "I heard them giggling." Rachel exchanged a worried glance with Claire. "Dancing, sweetie?" "In the dollhouse. After I blew out the nightlight, they tapped on the walls like little feet." Claire nodded, refusing to dismiss her niece's words. Instead, she lifted Lily into her lap. "All right. Let's see if we can catch them in the act tonight, but let's stay downstairs, okay?" Lily nodded, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Rachel patted her shoulder, and together they devised a watch plan. Claire would lie on the sofa with a flashlight, Rachel would sit across the room with her phone ready to record. That evening, Claire prepared a pot of chamomile tea while Lily ran a bath upstairs. She set a flashlight on the coffee table beside the dollhouse and dimmed the living room lights to a soft glow. At 8:15 p.m., she sent Rachel and Lily a text, "Ready when you are." An hour passed with nothing but the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. Claire stifled a yawn. Rachel joined her on the sofa, handing over a steaming mug of tea. Lily hovered at the edge of the table, eyes wide with anticipation. Suddenly, the overhead light flickered once, twice and went out, plunging the room into near darkness. Claire's flashlight beam bobbed as she reached for it, illuminating the dollhouse's front facade in stark relief. For a moment, everything was still. Then a soft click from inside the dollhouse. The small iron hook securing the tiny locked room sprang open. Claire and Rachel held their breath as Lily crept closer, peering into the newly revealed chamber. The flashlight's beam revealed a single featureless doll standing at the center, its porcelain face blank and eyes unblinking. Before Claire could speak, the faintest echo of footsteps sounded on the living room hardwood, a scratchy, slow tap 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 that matched the doll's stance. Claire's heart raced. She swung the flashlight toward the real room. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, yet the sound continued, circling the coffee table. Rachel fumbled for her phone and hit record. "Lily, stay back," she whispered firmly. But Lily merely smiled, mesmerized by the dollhouse's chamber. The doll inside began to tip forward on its tiny feet, tilting as though bowing. Each movement prompted a corresponding creak of the living room floor, once for the bow, once for a nod, again for a subtle shift to the left. Claire felt her skin prickle. She reached out to cover the dollhouse with a blanket, but before she could, the chamber door slammed shut, and the overhead lights blazed back on. In the sudden brightness, the dollhouse stood quiet and ordinary. The blanket lay crumpled at its base. A single hush passed between them. Rachel checked her phone. "I got it," she said, voice trembling. It really happened." Over the next 2 days, Claire and Rachel compared the dollhouse's occurrences with the house's real events. Night 2, 9:03 p.m. Dollhouse, in the kitchen room, a miniature stove's door swung open. Real house, the family's oven clicked and swung its door open on its own, sending a faint hiss of cooling heat. Night 3, 11:27 p.m. Dollhouse, in the bedroom, the tiny bedspread shifted, and a cradle rocked back and forth. Real house, Lily's bedroom door creaked. Through the keyhole, Rachel glimpsed the real cradle in the corner rock gently, though no breeze stirred. Night 4, 12:45 a.m. Dollhouse, in the locked chamber, a soft lantern glow appeared through its window. Real house, the single hallway light always switched off to conserve power clicked on and illuminated a mural of family photos, lingering for 30 seconds before flicking off. Each event followed the same pattern: the dolly room or feature would animate, then a corresponding real-world action echoed in perfect sync. The precision terrified Claire. She kept a notebook by her bed, logging every timestamp to ensure it wasn't imagination or coincidence. Growing dread. By the 5th night, nerves frayed to breaking. Claire couldn't focus at work, every email sounded like a distant whisper. She found herself glancing at the clock: 3:16 p.m., 11:27 p.m., 12:45 a.m., memorizing the times when reality had bent. That evening, she set up her most extensive watch yet, motion-activated cameras around the living room, multiple flashlights propped at every angle, and Rachel stationed in the kitchen, phone in hand ready to rush in at the first sign of movement. Lily insisted on sleeping in her own room, claiming the dollhouse needed quiet to play its magic. At 10:52 p.m., the cameras caught it: the dollhouse's front bay window rattled as if tapped from the inside. Claire bolted upright on the sofa. She clicked her flashlight on, his beam slicing through darkness to reveal the parlor's minuscule picture frames rattling in silent demonstration. At the same moment, the living room picture ledges above the sofa shuddered. One gilt frame tumbled to the floor, not broken, but perfectly landing face up, displaying a family portrait of Rachel and Lily. Claire dashed to pick it up, glancing back. The dollhouse's small parlor was still, but the chamber's iron hook stood ajar once more. The mother's footsteps. Rachel arrived breathless at 11:03 p.m., phone video recording in hand. "I heard them again," she said, voice raw. footsteps in Lily's room, the ones that matched the dollhouse's. She checked her watch, 11:03 p.m. It matched the locked chamber's latch clicking open on Claire's monitor, as the miniature doll reappeared under dim light. Claire swallowed noise of panic. "We have to end this," she whispered. "Before someone gets hurt or worse." Desperate measures. By midnight, they had resolved on a plan: return the dollhouse to wherever it came from, hoping the curse would stay behind. Claire wrapped it in a blanket. Together they loaded it into her car. As they drove back down Elm Grove, the house behind them lay silent in the dark. The garage sales tents were long gone. The bungalow stood empty, its windows dark, its yard silent. Claire set the dollhouse on the curb with a polite sign, "Free, please take away." She backed her car from the street, refusing to look at the strange gift any longer. Lily slept in her car seat, oblivious. That night at home, Claire collapsed into bed, adrenaline finally spent. Just before dawn, she stirred, drawn to her front window by a soft glow. There, on the windowsill outside, sat the dollhouse, its miniature bay window lit by a pale interior lamp. Beneath it lay a tiny slip of paper. Claire pressed her forehead to the cool glass and read, breath-catching. "She isn't done playing." The words etched in perfect miniature script sent a shiver through her. She realized then that the dollhouse was not merely a toy but a doorway entwined with sorrow, and that its game was far from over. Claire woke to a pale gray sky and the weight of last night's discovery pressing on her chest. The dollhouse, her niece's innocent treasure, stood perched on the sill outside her window, its tiny bay window aglow with a single, unmoving light. Beneath it lay that chilling note, "She isn't done playing." Now, Claire knew the final act of this macabre drama awaited, and she could no longer flee. That morning, Claire called Rachel. They agreed to meet at the house before Lily woke, intent on confronting the dollhouse's heart of mystery, the locked chamber. Claire laid the dollhouse on the coffee table, its painted roses and mint green trim looking absurdly cheerful in the daylight. The rest of the room's parlor, kitchen, bedroom stood open to inspection, but the small side chamber remained sealed by its iron hook. Claire reached for a thin jeweler's file. "We'll need to pick the lock gently," she murmured, voice tight. Rachel fetched a magnifying glass and a set of fine tools Claire kept for craft projects. They worked in silence, the only sounds their careful scraping of metal and the distant ticking of the hallway clock. At 9:12 a.m., the final tooth of the hook gave way. Claire eased the door open. Inside lay a miniature wooden cradle, painted pale blue. Nestled within was a tiny porcelain doll swaddled in lace. In one tiny porcelain hand, the doll clasped a scrap of paper, a name, scrawled in careful child's handwriting: Rosalind Harper. Rachel gasped. "That's not Lily's name." Claire unfolded a second, larger note taped inside the roof's interior. Rosalind Harper, born 1934. Disappeared age 4. Never seen again. The room spun. Rosalind Harper. Claire recalled reading a local history article about a little girl who vanished from her home on Elm Grove Drive in 1938. Despite searches, no trace was ever found. The dollhouse must have belonged to Rosalind originally, its locked chamber preserving her memory and her sorrow. A sudden breeze drifted through the living room, odd given all windows were closed. Claire shivered. As she looked down at Rosalind's doll, the tiny porcelain head tilted upward, its glassy eyes meeting hers. A faint whisper drifted through the air, so soft she thought it was her imagination. "Come play with me." Both women froze. The doll's free hand twitched, pointing toward the tiny cradle. Claire swallowed. "We need to return her," she said, tone urgent. "Back where she belongs." Rachel nodded. "But where?" "She vanished from this very house." Claire's mind raced. Maybe the dollhouse is the key to finding her resting place or granting her peace. That afternoon, Claire drove the dollhouse to the town's historical society, where she met Mr. Dalton, the archivist. He guided her to dusty filing cabinets and old newspaper clippings. Together they uncovered a faded photograph, little Rosalind sitting before what looked exactly like the dollhouse's facade, her dark curls bound with a ribbon. A note on the back read: "Rosalind's dollhouse, handmade by Grandpa Harper, kept locked forever." Further digging revealed that Rosalind's grandfather had died heartbroken a week after his granddaughter disappeared. The family home was demolished in the 1950s, the land became a parking lot for a crafts store until recent years. No grave marker existed for Rosalind. Mr. Dalton clasped Claire's hand. She was never laid to rest properly. Her family never found closure. Claire's eyes stung. Then we have to give her that. We have to bury he. That evening, under a bruised purple sky, Claire and Rachel returned to the now empty lot where the Harper house once stood. The ground was cracked asphalt, weeds pushing through seams. They dug a small hole, careful to gather a handful of fresh soil. Claire unwrapped Rosalind's tiny doll, and together they laid her gently into the earth. Claire whispered, "Rosalind, we're so sorry you were forgotten. May you find peace at last." They covered the hole, pressing the earth down softly. A single firefly flickered near the spot, its glow just a breath in the gathering dusk. Back at the Bennett home, Claire placed the dollhouse on the living room table one final time. Rachel fetched a handful of rose petals from their garden and a small glass of spring water. Together they stood in a circle around the dollhouse. Claire scattered petals over the roof and offered the water to the locked chamber, whispering, "By earth and bloom, by waters flow. We honor Rosalind, we let her go." The air shivered. The dollhouse's bay window glowed for a heartbeat, then faded. The iron hook fell away from the chamber door with a gentle click, leaving it open. Inside, the cradle was empty, no doll remained. Claire and Rachel exchanged a breathless look, hearts racing. They left the dollhouse on the table overnight and woke to the soft light of morning. The dollhouse looked unchanged, warm pastel trim, tiny windows, delicate roof shingles. But the final room's door hung open, its chamber bare. No trace of Rosalind's doll or her notes remained. Claire ran her finger along the wood grain. It felt smooth, as though time itself had polished away the sorrow. She smiled at Rachel. "I think she's finally at rest." Just as they began to dismantle their ritual supplies, a small scrap of paper drifted from the open chamber and fluttered to the table. Claire picked it up, eyes wide. "Thank you for playing with me." Underneath, a tiny heart was drawn in red ink. Claire tucked the note into her pocket. She and Rachel shared a quiet smile, knowing Rosalind's spirit had at last found her peace and allowed them to end her story with a final word of gratitude. In the days that followed, the Bennett living room felt lighter. Lily discovered the dollhouse's other rooms and arranged the miniature sofa and beds with delight, oblivious to their eerie history. Claire hung a family photo in place of the chamber, and Rachel planted roses along the walkway, honoring the girl who'd waited so many decades to play her final game. Sometimes, in the late afternoon light, Claire thought she saw a flicker of motion behind the dollhouse windows, a subtle nod of thanks from beyond the veil. And each time, she smiled, knowing the play had ended, and Rosalind Harper was finally free.